All right. So today we're going to go over the buyer rep agreement, tenant rep agreement, and the residential listing agreement. So we're just going to jump right into it. We're not going to waste a bunch of time. So the first thing we're going to start with is the buyer rep and tenant rep agreement. So this agreement can be used for buyers and it can be used for tenants as well. A lot of people don't like to use these. They feel like their clients kind of don't want to sign anything on the buyer side, or when they're working up front, it's a little bit different than a listing. But I will tell you this: in the state of Texas, we have what's called sub-agency, and so sub-agency basically means that if you do not have a buyer's representation agreement in place, then you are a sub-agent of the listing agent on a property. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is that everything you do, although you're helping the buyer, your fiduciary duty is to the seller. And so if you're representing a buyer and you're working against the seller trying to get the price down or get them to concede money or repairs, stuff like that, it's never really a big deal unless the deal goes sideways. And if the deal ever goes sideways and you end up in a court, in a witness box, and they go, well, okay, where's your buyer's representation agreement? We didn't see it during discovery. And you go, well, we didn't have one. We weren't using one. They're going to go, okay, well, if you didn't have one, then you're a sub-agent of the listing agent and you were working against the seller. So wouldn't you agree that you were violating your fiduciary duty to the seller? And you're going to kind of sit there and go, oh shit, what did I do? And so that's why it's important to have these buyer reps. A few years ago, not a few years ago, a couple years ago, the Texas Real Estate Commission changed our IABS forms, and I don't have one up, but I should have had one up. But let me pull this up real quick for you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. So it used to be that it was really hard to explain, why should I sign a buyer's rep? Why should you, as my client, sign a buyer's rep? It's really hard to explain. Well, what they did is they changed the form, the IABS form, to include gotta move this out of the way real quick here, to include a definition of sub-agent. And that was really great because now when you talk to clients, all you have to do is tell them, hey, look, this is the definition of sub-agent. If we don't have this agreement in place, I can help you, but I don't really represent you. And so right here, where is it? I think it's at the bottom. Here's right here at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to highlight it for y'all, and then I'm going to read it. So it says, as a subagent, a license holder acts as a subagent when aiding a buyer in a transaction without an agreement to represent the buyer. A subagent can assist the buyer but does not represent the buyer and must place the interests of the owner first. So that's like clear as day why you need to have the buyer's rep agreement. So if you have a client who's like, I don't really want to sign this buyer's rep agreement, you can say, okay, I get it. Here's this IABS form that I'm required to provide you anyway. And I just want to point down here to the bottom. Do you see where it says subagent here? If we don't have an agreement in place, which is totally okay if that's how you want to work, I don't really represent you. I can open the home for you. I can give you information about it, but my duty is to protect the seller, not you. And you can tell them, that's state law. That's the way it is, no matter who you work with. And if you explain it to them like that, usually they go, oh man, I want you to represent me. I want you looking out for my interest, not the seller's. And so they're much more likely to sign. That, along with the 5 p.m. option period, are like the two best changes that Trek has made in like 3 or 4 years. They're awesome. Makes it super easy. So, does anybody have any questions about getting your buyer to sign a buyer's rep agreement, or is any questions about why it's important and relevant to have? Nope. Okay. If you do think of some, just let me know. So let's go through this form. Okay, this is the Texas Association of Realtors buyer's rep form. It's the one we should be using. These are not forms that are put up by Trek. A lot of times people will go, well, what about the Trek buyer representation agreement? Trek does not put out buyer's rep agreements. They don't put out listing agreements. This is a TAR form. So much like a listing agreement, we have the client's name at the top, their address, their phone number, email. You don't necessarily need to have an address, but putting a phone number in an email in here is good. We want to make sure that we tie their identification to something else at some point. The other thing that I'll tell you is if you're working with whoever is going to be purchasing the property or leasing the property needs to be on this agreement. So if you're working with a gentleman whose girlfriend is really involved in the process, but she's not going on the loan or the title to the home, she doesn't go on this buyer representation agreement. Only the client, whoever you're working with, whoever's the actual purchaser, that's the only person that goes here. Likewise, if you're working with a married couple, you have to put both on there. You can't just put one and say, oh, I'm just working with, they're married, so I'm just going to put the one name down. If you don't have both names, then you kind of get yourself into a sticky situation if the wife or the husband, whoever's not on the agreement, decides they want to go work with somebody else, because now you have two different agreements. Both are going to be a little shaky, and you want to make sure that you're rock solid. So that's what goes up here. Broker is going to be Realty Solutions. The address is going to be our PO box that we have. It's going to be the zip code. It's going to be your phone number and your email address. Okay. On the broker side, this should always be filled. We don't have a fax number because it's 2017. Nobody uses fax machines anymore. So we don't have a fax number, but everything else on this broker section here needs to be filled out. Right. So we'll move down this list. So this is an appointment. So the client is granting the broker the exclusive right to act as their real estate agent for the purpose of acquiring property. So what does exclusive right mean? And we'll go over this also when we do the listing agreement, but exclusive right means that it doesn't matter who finds the property, to what degree you help them. If they buy a property during the time of this buyer's rep agreement, you get paid. Period. End of story.
I'm talking about.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether they go to a new home builder and the home builder says, well, you weren't here the first time they came, so we're not going to put you on the contract. You can say, hey, that's fine. My clients are still on the hook for paying me, and this is what this means. All right. So then we have some definitions. We always got to know what the different terms in the agreement mean. So to acquire means to purchase or lease. Closing is when we transfer legal title to the property from the seller to the buyer, or when the tenant moves in, depending on when the landlord is going to let them come in so they can sign a lease but not move in yet. So it's going to be whenever they move in. Market area. So you'll hear some different things about this depending on the class you go to. So market area means that area in the state of Texas within the perimeter boundaries of the following areas. So we are licensed, all of us, in the state of Texas. You can sell property anywhere within our borders, and that's fine. But your client may not want to use you for anywhere outside of a specific area. So if you have a client in Houston who wants to buy a home, well, they may buy homes in Dallas and Austin and other places, but they may not want you as their agent in those areas. So they may want to be real specific. In my opinion, what I usually put in here is I'll put any areas covered under NTRIS or HAR or Actress or SABOR, or whatever your MLS is, whatever areas your MLS where you primarily work is, I will put that in this area right here. So it's kind of a broad area, so you don't have to lock yourself down to just like one county or one city, but it's not like the whole state. So if you just put the area covered by whatever MLS you're in, you'll be covered and you'll be just fine there. Property means any interest in real estate, including but not limited to properties listed in the MLS or other listing services, properties for sale by owner and properties for sale by builders. So again, when you have this appointment, you have an exclusive right, all right, when they purchase a property, and property means anything. MLS, for sale by owner, builders, it doesn't matter. If they buy something, you get paid, all right? Then you have the term. So it commences on whatever date they're going to sign, and it ends on whatever date you select here. You must have an ending date. TREC requires that you have an ending date. This cannot be open-ended, going on forever and ever. So you pick whatever date works for you and your clients. It's individual. Some clients maybe only want to do it for a couple weeks. They want to see how you are. Maybe the client wants to, they're like, hey, we really like you. We want to work with you for as long as it takes. So you're going to do it for 6 months, 12 months, whatever works for you and your clients.
All right? Do you recommend?
So here's how I do mine. I run mine to December 31st of every listing agreement, every buyer's rep agreement, they all run to December 31st. And the reason I do them like that is for filing purposes, because I know that January 1st of every year, I have to renew all my stuff. That way I'm not trying to track like, oh, okay, this one ends next month on the 15th, and then I got one next month that ends the 18th. For me, it's just a pain in the butt to track those. So I just run everything to the very end of the year, and then just know that at the very end of the year, I just got to re-up and redo everybody's thing. And I explain that to them, and I've never had anybody have an issue with it at all. But again, that's a personal thing for me. It's just filing. Yes.
Heck, we have it, if you do it, I mean, toward the end of the year though, that's only giving you like a month or two, and to find a house and get under contract and close.
So here's my opinion. If you can get a client locked down and they want to work with you, getting it to renew is not going to be such a big deal. If it's a client where you're like, I'm not really sure if they're going to be flaky or if they're going to, if they're going to try and screw me, if you get to that point, maybe you do want to run it a little bit longer. This is, and you're certainly welcome to do that. This is just how I do it. That's just me. I've never had a client that's like, I don't want to renew with you. If it's like December 15th, then I might just run it till like the end of the following year. I won't give myself 2 weeks, but if it's like anytime in November or before, I'll just run it to the end of the year and renew everything then. But in my brain with everything else I have going on, it makes it real easy for me to know when everything is shutting down. So.
Do you need for rentals too?
Not so much for rentals, because rentals are usually, they're usually quick. You're not usually spending months and months and months looking for a rental. So I do not do them for a rental. Those are, but only because they're quick.
Gotcha.
So, all right. So broker's obligations. So this number 5 here, this is what our responsibilities are. Me as the broker and as the brokerage, and you guys as agents of the brokerage. All right. So we use our best efforts to assist clients in acquiring property in the market area. We're going to assist clients in negotiating the acquisition of that property in the market area, and we're going to comply with the other provisions of this agreement. So we see in that one sentence, market area is mentioned twice. Okay. When your clients hire you to do a job in the market area, that's what they're asking of you to do, which is why I suggest you put whatever areas are covered by your MLS, because it's real easy at that point. There's no real limits. You can send them anything. But if you, let's say that you're working in Harris County, okay? You put Harris County there, and you found the perfect property for them, same area they want, just on the other side of the county line. You send that to them. And they're like, oh my goodness, this is perfect. We love it. Let's do it. You've sent them a property outside of their market area. You technically don't have an agreement for that particular property, because you're limited to whatever the market area that you describe is. So make sure you're not sending them properties outside their market area. If they're wanting to look at properties outside that area, go ahead and expand or make an amendment to this and expand the market area, or just do as I'm suggesting and just put your whole MLS area as the market area to begin with, and then you don't ever run into this problem.
One other quick question. Do you recommend, let's say, like, instead of could you recommend as in getting this signed before even a pre-approval, saying like, as in, if you even want me to search properties for you or work with you with your credit, I want to be in this with you for the long run. You ever do that, or you usually do that to like a pre-approval?
So here's how I will usually do it. I will usually meet with somebody one time, not to show homes, just meet with them at Starbucks or at their home or at their office, wherever they're comfortable meeting, and then I'm comfortable meeting. I'll meet them one time to discuss what they're looking for, figure out what their needs are, how they want to approach the process, what their timeline is. I will give them a copy of this at that time. I don't ask them to sign it, but I'll give them a copy to this, and we'll go over it and I'll explain it, and then I'll get them plugged in with a lender. Once that lender provides a pre-approval for them and they want to start searching and looking for houses, at that point, I'll kind of simultaneously, I'll send this to them via DocuSign to sign off on, and I'll set up a search of properties for them, and I'll kind of look for some specific properties to see if there's anything out there that sticks out. So I'll kind of do those. I don't personally show homes unless I have a pre-approval letter. Every agent's a little bit different, but in my eyes, if we don't have a pre-approval, we have no idea how much you're eligible for, how much money you need down. Without a pre-approval, you couldn't go look at a home and write an offer right then and there for that property, because you don't have any of the things that you need. So, I don't show homes. Some people will show, I'll show one home without a pre-approval, but then you have to get a pre-approval. And some people will show homes all day long without a pre-approval, and they'll just kind of wait till they find one. In my opinion, if you do that, you're kind of behind the 8 ball once you find something that you like. I tell every client you need to be ready to walk into a house, say this is the one, and write an offer that afternoon or that evening, sign it and send it over with your pre-approval letter. And I think most markets in Texas are pretty standard that, if you submit an offer to a listing agent, you better have a pre-approval with it, or they're going to kind of look at it sideways anyway. Okay, so number 6. So number 6 is going to be the client's obligations to us. So this is a really important part to go over with them. And I've never had anybody that's get offended by this or question it, but you really need to outline, this is what I'm doing for you, and this is what you're doing for me. So they're going to work exclusively with us to acquire property and negotiate for the purchase of that property. They're not calling other agents. They're not working with other agents. They're just working with us. That they will inform other brokers, sales agents, sellers, and landlords, anybody else, that they are working with us and refer them to us. So, if they call a listing agent calls them back, we expect them to say, hey, I'm working with Patrick Connell with Realty Solutions. And so, I appreciate you calling me back, but I'm going to need you to go through him. So we want them to do that. And then we want to make sure that they comply with all the other provisions of this agreement. So in that same vein, okay, the representations, section 7, these are things that we represent to each other, and more specifically that the client represents to us. So they're in good faith entering into this agreement with us. So each person signing the agreement represents they have the legal capacity, blah, 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 blah. We'll make sure the agreement's nice and legal. Okay. The client is going to agree that they're not part of another buyer representation agreement with any other broker to acquire property in the market area. They can certainly have other buyer rep agreements with other brokers and agents as long as it's not in the same area. So again, that guy buying property in Dallas and Austin and San Antonio and Houston can certainly have an agreement with 4 different brokers in all 4 of those market areas. The client represents that all the information relating to the ability to acquire property is true and correct. So, we have they can actually buy property. They're actually looking for property. They're not just getting us out of our house, to go show them properties just for fun on the weekends. Again, this is another important reason why it's good to have a pre-approval before you show homes, because you can be sure that whoever you're showing homes to is legit. They want to buy a home. They have the ability to buy a home. They're not out just, looking at homes. We just kind of want to see what's available out there, but we're not really looking to buy or make a move right now. Okay. And then if there's going to be a relocation company, that name is going to go right here. That's really important, because if there's a relocation company involved, it's likely that somebody's going to take a hit on the commission, or there's going to be some extra rules or paperwork that need to go into that. And so you want to know about that ahead of time. All right. So we're going to spend a little bit of extra time on intermediary. And then when we get to the listing agreement, we won't have to spend as much time. But intermediary in Texas. So in Texas, we do not have what they call dual agency. So dual agency says I represent you, the seller, and I represent you, the buyer. I represent both of you. I'm looking out for everybody's interests and making sure that, I'm getting the best deal for everybody. Some states have that. In Texas, we don't have that. We have what's called intermediary. Texas believes there's no good way for you to actually represent 2 competing parties in the same transaction. It doesn't make any sense. So what is intermediary? Basically, intermediary is I don't represent either one of you. I'm just kind of here to facilitate the transaction. You guys need to kind of figure out a price that works for you, terms that work for you, but I can't advise you on anything. I'm just here to make sure that everybody's fair with one another, make sure the paperwork's done correctly, make sure the lender's doing what they're doing, the title company's doing what they're doing, but I don't really represent any particular party. And that's why TREC requires a lot of disclosures that when it comes down to intermediary, because they need people to understand, look, you're giving up your representation. We're no longer going to represent you. We're just kind of helping facilitate the transaction. So a client can choose to have intermediary status or not. If they click no, okay, they don't wish to see any of the listings a broker has. This basically means that if our brokerage has a listing, so let's say that Kathy has a listing and Chris has a buyer. Well, if that buyer doesn't want to engage an intermediary with our brokerage, then there's no point in Chris showing Kathy's listing, even if it's perfect for that buyer, because they don't want to engage in that. They want representation, period. So how do we get around this? How do we represent? How can we get Chris to show Kathy's property, without really flirting with the intermediary status? Well, we have a couple of sub levels of intermediary, and so you have true intermediary. I can't say this word over and over again. It's killing me. Intermediary. We have a couple of different levels. You have true intermediary, which is basically I don't represent anybody. It's just me the agent, and you two parties, and I'm helping you both. Okay, but I'm not representing. And then we have intermediary with appointments. And so basically, what happens with intermediary with appointments, they agree that they will engage an intermediary. But what we essentially get is they now become the broker's client. I mean, they're always the broker's client, but now, you guys move out of the way, they're mine, and then I reappoint each person to represent their side. So I'm at the head of this, and Kathy would be representing her seller, and Chris would be representing his buyer, and they would be able to engage just like they would in a normal transaction. Okay, but again, we have to have a lot of disclosures to go with this. Within our policies and procedures, you will see that if there's a chance that you'll be engaging in an intermediary transaction, that you have to email me or reach out to me, and you have to get written approval to engage in that transaction. That's required by TREC. TREC requires that the broker approve and actually assign representatives. For us, it's more just a CYA. I just want to know what's going to happen. I just want to make sure that both agents understand what the expectation is, and that we don't get into any trouble by we don't want Chris and Kathy kind of like sharing information, trying to figure out how they can get their clients to agree while sharing information that's confidential. We don't want that to happen. That's usually what happens when you have a large office, and people just kind of start talking to try and just get a deal done, and that's not really what the true intermediary with assignments is supposed to be like. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? It's super confusing. It's kind of a pain.
I'd like to go over it again, like after, another day, if you wouldn't mind.
That's fine. And I'll be real honest with you. I could spend an hour or more just talking about intermediary status. So it's a lot of confusing stuff. I read through this area later on. Okay.
So most of the time it's going to be A though, correct?
Most of the time it'll be A. I always have my clients do A, and it's almost never a problem.
Okay.
And you oftentimes, I mean, if we grew to like 1,000 agents and you had 500 agents in Houston metro and surrounding areas, it's possible you might run into a listing. If we stick to 50 agents, or you may be spread out enough where you may not run into that, but you may. But we'll figure it out as it goes. So whenever you have time.
I've done a lot of those, and it's really, as long as you have ethical agents, it's really not that hard. You just have to.
Right. It's really not. It's confusing more than anything from the get-go. And I have a nice pictograph thing that I'll post up in the Facebook group that kind of gives a good example of the different ways that you can engage an intermediary. And let me wait, where to go. So just as we have this notice here. So we have these little sections here, but when we have a nice big bold print. So this is just a reminder. So we may not disclose to client that a seller or landlord may accept a price less than asking price, and you can't tell that a buyer is willing to pay more than they're willing to pay. Everybody needs to be treated honestly, and everybody shall comply with TRELA, which is the Texas Real Estate License Act. Read through this. We'll do a separate course all on intermediary. So competing clients. So this is important because it'll make your client feel really good, and it'll also kind of set some boundaries for them. So what this section basically says is, look, we don't pick and choose favorites. If you have a client that's looking for the same thing, you're going to show the house to both of them. You're not going to pick one over the other. You're not going to say, hey, I'll show you this, but I'm not going to tell anybody else about it. You're going to treat everybody fairly and give everybody an equal shot. And if they both want to submit an offer, then you deal with it at that point. But you just need to let the client know, hey, I'm showing if we find a house that works for you, I'm still showing every other buyer I have. And my brokerage is showing every other buyer we have the same house. If it works for them, we're not going to play favorites. Confidential information, kind of self-explanatory. So everything that you gain during this transaction is going to be confidential. And the only time you would release that is if you're required to by a court or a lawsuit where you were subpoenaed, so on and so forth. This section, where does it say? Trying to see where it says. Basically, this section, confidential information, extends all the way till the end of time. Just because this agreement ends does not mean that the confidential information section stops. So I don't know if it's here or if it's further along. It may be further along in the listing in the buyer's rep agreement, but this section is important, and I'll use my example earlier. So if you have a guy who's buying a house and his girlfriend is super involved in the process, but she's not a client, she's not the client. Okay, you will run into situations where she may call and say, hey, John Smith is busy, and so he asked me to pick up some paperwork from you, or he asked me to get checks from you, or he asked me to whatever, do something that would allow her to see or be purviewed to confidential information. If that's the case, you need to have something in writing from your client that says, hey, Sally Sue is allowed to view, be a part of the transaction. So if you don't have something in writing and this person calls, you need to tell them, hey, I know you're a part of this. I want to help you out, but you're not my client. I can't legally release information to you. The other situation that you might encounter this is parents. Parents loved, especially first-time home buyer. Young first-time home buyer brings their parents. Parents like to be super involved in the transaction, and that's great. But if they call you with questions regarding the transaction, you need to zip your lip and just explain to them, look, I can't talk to you. You need to talk to your son, daughter, whoever the client is, and get that information from them because I can't share that with you. And people can and will be really pushy about it and really crappy about it. And you just need to hold to your guns and just let them know, like, I can't talk to you about this stuff. Most people will respect that and say, okay, my fault, no big deal. Some people really push, and when certain people push, you just need to be able to stand up and say, it's not going to happen. And you will never hear anything negative come from me. If you tell a parent or a girlfriend or whatever, like, look, I can't do that, and they call me and want to complain about you, they're going to get an earful from me about how we're not going to do that. And so you ain't ever got to worry about, having any issues with me about not sharing information. Questions about that at all? Okay. Let's move on to this next page. So broker's fees. So this is like
Wait,
what?
I have a question.
Yeah.
On that confidential part, and I'm sorry, I was plugging in my computer, but did you say that we can share the information with the parent or whatever with a verbal okay, or does it have to be in writing?
Must be in writing.
Okay, very well.
Must be in writing, and then I would add that to your files. I would add it to SkySlope that we had permission. And when I say in writing, I don't mean like, hey, here's an email. Is this okay? I mean, like, type something up that says you give permission and send it to them to DocuSign or digitally sign somehow and take that back.
Okay.
That's what you.
What about like one time I was working with an older mom, and it was her son that kept wanting, to make sure that everything was okay. And she was in the room with me, and she would say, it's okay, you can tell them whatever. Is that okay?
So in that situation, I don't have an issue with that. But yeah, if you were just sitting there and son asked a question, your due diligence is to look at the client and say, hey, is it okay if I talk about this stuff in front of him? And and if they're like, yeah, that's fine, then you can go ahead and discuss that thing. What I'm mostly talking about is situations where the client is not present or has not given specific permission in writing, and somebody's calling to ask about the transaction. That's mostly what I'm focusing on with this section. If somebody's in person, then they should have objected in person that they didn't want anybody to know about it. And so no issue with that. Okay. So broker's fees. So like the most important part of the whole thing because we want to get paid, right? So so commission. So the parties agree that the broker will receive a commission that's calculated as follows: as a percentage of the sales price, which is almost always what it's going to be, or if they're going to lease, it's going to be a percentage of the lease or a percentage of all the rents paid over a term of the lease. I have never seen a residential lease transaction where they paid commissions like this. This is more of a commercial payment. So in commercial transactions, you basically take a percentage of all the rent paid over the entire term of the lease. So like a 5-year lease is not worth as much as like a 10-year lease. So that's usually how commercial transaction leases get paid, not residential. Usually residential is just a percentage of 1 month's rent. Okay, so source of commission payment. So this paragraph right here, you need to be sure to go over with your client. This can become a sticking point for some clients. And so basically it says broker will seek to obtain payment of the commission specified in paragraph 11A from the seller, the landlord, or their agent. And then in nice big bold underlined print, if such a person refuses to pay, okay, the client being the buyer will pay the broker the amount specified. Less any amounts you receive from other people. So buyers, have been hit over and over and over the head with, hey, our services are free. The sellers pay for it, or the listing agent pays for it. I will leave it up to you to decide whether or not you want to cross out this section right here, this bolded section. So keep in mind, in Texas, we always hear you're not an attorney, you can't change the contracts, blah, 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 blah. That's great, and that applies to all the transactions we do except for these forms, because in these forms, we, the brokerage, are a party to the transaction, so we can change anything we want. So I'd be lying if I said I've never crossed this section out for a client because it made them feel better about the transaction. Now, if you do that, you need to realize that you are putting yourself at risk of not getting paid at all if something goes haywire with the seller or their agent, or the landlord and their agent. Okay, so if your clients strongly object to this to the point where they're like, I don't want to work with you if this is how it's going to be, I'll leave it up to you guys whether you want to cross it out or not. But if you cross it out, you need to understand that you're at risk for not getting paid if something happens on the back end with the transaction. Okay.
I've had problems a couple of times with builders that come back around and don't want to pay. And because that was in there, I told them, I said, well, did you make them aware that they're going to have to pay me since you're not paying me, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden they were happy to pay me.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And so again, that's a good reason to keep it in there. So, but again, every deal is different. Every client's different. And so, we sometimes we need to do things here or there to kind of convince somebody to work with us. If this is one of those things, I have no problems if that's what you want to do. Again, for like the third time, just be aware, if you cross it out, there is a potential you don't get paid at the end of the transaction if something goes wrong with the listing agent or the builder or the seller paying you. Okay. So when do we get commission? When do we get paid? We know how much we're going to get. We know where it's coming from, but when do we get it? Okay. So I'm going to read through this and we're going to go over each different part. So a person is not obligated to pay broker a commission until such a time as broker commission is earned and payable. They are two different things. In order to get paid, you need both to occur. So what does it mean to be earned? So our commission is earned when the client enters into a contract to buy or lease a property in the market area, or the client breaches our agreement, this agreement. And we'll talk about a little later on what that means as far as how they might breach it. Okay. So if they breach the agreement or they go under contract, all of a sudden you have earned your commission. So when is it payable? Okay. The commission is payable during this agreement or after it ends, but when one of two things happens. Okay. The closing of the transaction occurs, or the client breaches the contract to buy or lease a property in the market area, or the third thing is if the client breaches this agreement. So, so what does that what do some of those things mean? So if you have a buyer, okay, and your buyer is under contract, and a week before closing they go, we've decided we just don't want to buy anymore. We're not gonna. I know we're under contract. We know we're gonna lose our earnest money, but we're not gonna buy. We're gonna rent again. Our same place that we're renting now. We've already renewed our lease, and so that's what we're gonna do. Sorry, we know you've put in all this work and time, but we're just not going to. They're still required to pay you a commission. Whether you want to go after that commission or not is entirely up to you guys. Will support you no matter what you decide. There are several factors that go into deciding whether to go after somebody like that, and we will have a discussion about those different factors. And if you decide that that's what you ultimately want to do, then that's what we'll do. But that would be a scenario where, as a buyer, they would still be required to pay you a commission even if they didn't purchase a property. Does that make sense?
Yep.
We will see a similar paragraph in the listing agreement that says if the seller a week before closing says, you know what, I'm just not going to sell my property, they're also still required to pay you a commission. Okay. Additional compensation. Okay, so let's say that has anybody ever seen a listing that has a bonus attached to it? They're out there, $1,000, $5,000, $2,500. Or it's a lease and it's like, hey, I'll give you $100 gift card. This covers that additional compensation. So if there's additional compensation above and beyond whatever's in 11A, that's also yours. You're not required to give it to them. The other thing would be those that the client's not obligated to pay. So if the builder's offering you a $5,000 bonus, that's great. You get to keep it. You don't have to give it up. But if for some reason they don't pay you the bonus at the end of the day, the client's not obligated to pay you the bonus. Okay. If your buyer purchases or leases one of the broker's listings, okay, we'll end up being paid according to whatever the broker listing agreement with that owner is, and then the buyer will have no obligation to pay. So this kind of goes hand in hand with intermediary. So we're not gonna if we have the listing at let's say 6% and they purchase that, we're not gonna ding them for an extra 3% on top of that 6% just because we did it in house. They will be absolved of having to pay whatever's in this agreement because we're gonna take it out of the listing commission. Okay. So here's this section F here kind of talks about additional compensation. So you have additional compensation in the form of bonuses, and then you have additional compensation that's maybe a little different. So construction. So if your client uses your services to help build a home, now we're not talking about going to a builder that's hey, I have a home and we're going to pay you a commission. We're talking about, hey, I want you to show me raw land. I want to buy raw land. I want you to help me find a custom builder. I want that builder to build me a home. And, I want your help with that whole process. That's what this section right here is for. Okay. So what I put in here is I will usually put in here 3% because that's my fee, but whatever your fee is, 3% of total construction costs, including land and improvements. 3% of total construction costs, including land and improvements. So why do I put that? Well, because I don't want to just be paid on the land or the house. I want to be paid on the whole thing. Every dollar they spend building a home, I want a percentage of that. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? It's pretty clear cut. Is there any confusion though? Okay. Service providers. So if you receive a kickback from, alarm system company, moving company, Time Warner Cable, whoever, a contractor that does repairs, whoever, if you receive that, that's where this falls in right here in the section 2. Okay. Our policies and procedures allow you to receive those as long as we provide the required disclosures. I will tell, and there are some people that make some money doing that. I will tell you this, and again, you guys can handle your business how you want. As a personal policy of mine. I do not take kickbacks from anybody. Lenders, well, not lenders, that's a whole different story. Home warranty companies, alarm companies, moving companies, telecommunication providers, contractors. I don't take kickbacks from anybody because I don't ever want somebody to come back and say, hey, you recommended this person because you were getting money, they screwed me, and now I'm going to sue you. I mean, $25 to $50 here or there from different service providers is not a huge amount of money for the liability that I see comes with doing something like that. So my personal policy is I don't take kickbacks from anybody. I refer people I know that are good. If they offer kickbacks, I say, hey, no thanks. I appreciate it, but I don't want it. That's just me. You guys are welcome to do it however you want, as long as we're providing the required disclosures. So, and the required disclosures are a part of our policies and procedures. Other compensation here. So let's say that you're going to be paid hourly for the transaction that you're working on. So 0 here, 0, 0, 0 here, and then down here in this other, we're going to charge, $300 an hour for our services. That's where you would put something like that down here. So maybe somebody doesn't want to hire you. Maybe they want to hire you just to help with like the negotiation portion, but they don't want help with like the rest of the transaction. Okay, fine. I'll help with that portion. You'll pay me hourly, and I'll describe whatever that fee is and how I calculate it down here. Now, that would be considered consulting, which is a prohibited activity under our policies and procedures. So that doesn't mean you can't ever do it. Just means if you're going to do it, that you need to shoot me an email and we need to have a discussion about it before you do it, so that I make sure that we're all on the same page, because there's some different stuff that goes into doing consulting work than just a traditional transaction. All right. Protection periods. So basically, if your agreement ends and they move in or purchase a home or go under contract on a home that you showed them while the contract was in effect, the protection period is what allows you to still get paid. The number of days that this extends is blank, so you can put 30 days, 15 days, 10 days, whatever. You put a certain number of days here. 30 to 60 is probably normal. Because I run all my agreements to the end of the year, I usually just put 1 day, because I'm going to turn around and renew the agreement anyway. But 30 to 60 is normal, I think, for most markets. What happens in order to make this apply is that within no later than 10 days after the agreement ends, we must send them a list of all the properties that we showed them. And that list becomes our reference point. So if they go under contract on one of those properties on the list within the number of days specified in the protection period, you still get paid. It's great. This paragraph survives termination. However, and this is kind of a screwy workaround. This whole protection period disappears, goes away, if they enter into another buyer's rep agreement with another Texas Association of Realtors, Realtor. So if somebody's in agreement and has a protection period, but then goes and finds other representation with another Realtor, then this whole section is meaningless, more or less. All right. Escrow authorization. Okay, so this allows us to authorize the escrow and closing agent to basically pay us our money at the end of the transaction. So that's they allow us to kind of make that give those directions to the title company on how they're going to pay us and what they're going to pay us. County, amounts payable to broker are paid in cash in. Okay, this right here, this section on all our agreements should be Bastrop County. And that's because that's where the brokerage is located. I mean, for Trek purposes, I reside here. The brokerage is based out of here as far as Trek is concerned. And so this you should never ever have an issue with this. This is just legal mumbo jumbo. And basically what this means is that they have to send us the check to here, Bastrop County. If we put Harris County here, for example, for a Houston transaction, we put Harris County here, and I'm like, hey, can you mail me a check? They could say no. Be like, no, come pick it up. It's in Harris County, which is where it was required to be paid. So most title companies aren't like that, but this section right here is what allows us to say, hey, mail us our check. This should be Bastrop County. And you can tell your clients that has nothing to do with theirs. This has everything to do with the title company, and it's just legal mumbo jumbo, and not worry about it. All right. So mediation, okay, Texas is a big proponent of mediation. So if there's a disagreement about what the agent's supposed to be doing, what the client's supposed to be doing, there's just something isn't not jiving. Everybody's going to agree to mediate before they sue each other. That's basically what we get out of this. Okay. Default. So if either party if either party fails to comply with this agreement, they're in default, or they make false representations like they aren't actually able to buy a house. Okay, you're in default. If the client's in default, the client will be liable for the amount of compensation that broker would have received under the agreement. Okay, if the broker's in default, client may exercise any remedy under law, which basically means if they think we've screwed them, they can sue us. If they don't think we've screwed them, then they don't really have anything that they can do. Attorney's fees. So whoever wins in a court proceeding will pay the attorney's fees of the other side. All right. Limitation of liability. This is like one of my favorite reasons, not my favorite reason, but one of the reasons that I like using an actual buyer's representation agreement. All right. This paragraph right here basically says that if you get hurt, not on me. If we're walking through a house and you fall and bust your face, not my fault. You're clumsy. If we're driving around the neighborhood to look at houses and I make a quick turn and you make a quick turn behind me and you hit a kid, not my fault. You're a horrible driver. All right. This takes all claims for injury or damage or liability off of us as the agents and the brokerage. All right. This is huge, especially for things like new construction where people walk around construction sites and get nails in their shoes and in their legs, or they fall. There was a story like 2 weeks ago. This doesn't really apply to us because these idiots were walking around on their own, but they were up near Dallas walking around in a neighborhood under construction, and this lady fell off a second story, second floor of a home under construction and like broke her leg and like busted her face all up, had a concussion because they were on a property they shouldn't have been on in the first place. But if those were your clients and you were walking around with them and that happened, your first thought should be, oh, are they okay? And then the next thought should be, am I liable for any of this stuff? This section right here, paragraph 15, makes it so that we're not liable if they get hurt while we're out looking at homes. Any questions about that at all? It's like so important that they like bolded the whole paragraph. So I'm just gonna focus on it. This is huge right here. If we don't have a buyer's rep agreement and we're out showing homes, somebody gets hurt, it's very likely they could come back and try and blame you for something. And then we have addenda that's going to go with this. So we always have the information and brokerage services form. Okay, that's required. All right, and then a broker required form for all buyers is the general information and notice to a buyer. And we went over that, I believe, no, we didn't go over that in the other video. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. The general information and notice to buyer form is a form that contains, and I'm not going to go through the whole form because it's like 4 pages long, but I'll scroll through it real quick. But this is a form that contains all kinds of definitions and tells you what different things are. And it's a very good CYA document. It explains things like flood zones and how how soils move and insurance and home warranties and school boundaries and surveys and all kinds of different stuff. This is a really good form, and the reason that we require it is because if you provide them this form, they can never come back and say, oh, we didn't know about title insurance. We didn't know that this property could have been annexed by a city, and so now our taxes are going up. We didn't know about tax prorations. This thing has like all the most common things that people complain about that they didn't know, and they've put it into this nice form. So we're going to provide everybody with this form. Again, it's good information for them. It's good CYA for us. All right. Special provisions. I don't really ever have any special provisions that I would add into a buyer's rep agreement. It's pretty self-explanatory. Here are some other things that you can provide if you want: protecting your home from mold, information about property insurance, protecting your family from lead, information about flood zones, home inspection. You can certainly add all these ones if you want, but you're not required to. The general information and notice to buyer is the only one you're required to by the brokerage. And then we have additional notices. So brokerage fees are going to be shared between brokers. They're not fixed or controlled. So this is our deceptive trade practice little paragraph here. So, everything's negotiable. We adhere to fair housing rules. We're not going to discriminate based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, familial status, and the National Association of Realtors adds sexual orientation and gender identity. Those are not federal, but if you're a realtor, then those are added on there as well. Okay, and then we have so broker is not a property inspector, surveyor, engineer. We can certainly put people in contact with these kinds of people, but we are not those people. All right. And then if client purchases a property, client should have an abstract covering the property examined by an attorney. This section right here, paragraph D, that is required by TREC. TREC requires us as brokers and agents to tell clients that they must have, or they should have, their abstract title policy examined by an attorney. This paragraph is also reiterated in the general information and notice to buyer. I think I said that wrong. General information notice to buyer. It appears in there again too, so you've hit it up twice. And then here it kind of talks about residential service contracts, which are home warranties, and that they may purchase one, and it must be through a residential company, residential service company operating in Texas. All right. And the nice big bold print, contact an attorney. If you're not sure of anything else, it's a legal agreement, blah, 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 blah. Broker's name goes here. Our license number goes here. You guys sign here. Your name goes here. And clients go right here. All right. Any questions about this document? Okay. All right. No. The listing agreement, I think we're gonna go through a little bit quicker because a lot of the paragraphs are similar. So the parties, again, the seller. In this instance, the seller's address should be here. You should have a seller's address and their phone number and an email. Broker is the same as the buyer's rep agreement. Our PO box here, your phone number, your email address. Seller appoints broker as seller's sole and exclusive real estate agent and grants broker exclusive right to sell. So what is an exclusive right to sell? Similar to the buyer's rep agreement, it doesn't matter who buys it or how it gets sold. If it gets sold and it's during this agreement, we get paid. So if they sell it to their neighbor or they find their own buyer or, however a buyer is found, you're the exclusive, you have the exclusive right to sell. You get paid either way, right? So property description. So we have the legal description here. Most legal descriptions have a lot, and a block, and then some type of subdivision name here. If there's no lot or block, or it's kind of confusing, you can just put the whole name here in this next section. In the city it's in the county it's in, and then what the address and zip code is. All right. So we went over this in the 1-to-4 contract, so I'm not going to go over it a bunch here, but this is a reminder. You need to read through the improvements and accessories. So the property is the land plus the improvements, meaning the house, okay, along with these improvements. So things like ceiling fans, smoke detectors, water softeners, chandeliers, kitchen equipment. All these things are a part of the property if they're permanently installed and built in. If you want some more information about this and some specifics about this, go watch the 1-to-4 contract video. We spend probably like 20 minutes on these two sections just right here. Accessories include things that maybe aren't necessarily attached, but that are a part of the property. So like curtains and rods, keys, swimming pool equipment, window air conditioning units, stuff like that. Exclusions. So this is important. If there's anything here in either one of these, so say they have a family chandelier that's been in their family for decades. So they want to sell everything except that. That's going to go right in here. Family chandelier in living room. We're going to put that here, and we're going to make sure that that appears on the 1-to-4 contract in the exclusions area as well. So that's their chance to list here anything that they may want to keep that may be considered part of the property. Whether or not the home is in a mandatory membership HOA. Okay. We have a listing price. So seller instructs broker to market the property at the following price. So this is going to be whatever our CMA reveals and whatever our seller is going to agree to. Seller agrees to sell the property for the listing price or any other price acceptable to the seller. Seller will pay all typical closing costs charged to sellers. in a real estate transaction. So there's a little bit of confusion out there as far as like, okay, if you get a full price offer, does a seller have to sell? The answer is no. In Texas, they don't have to sell. Just because they get a full price offer does not mean that they must sell. However, if you have a full price offer with good solid terms and they refuse to engage in negotiations or they refuse to sign the contract, that's kind of where this paragraph comes into it. You may, depending on the situation, you may have to explain to your client, like, look, I know you don't, you think that you can do better than list price, but you've agreed to sell it for list price, and that's part of our listing agreement. And if you're not going to do that, then what are we doing here? I don't just list property just to have them sit and look pretty. We got to sell this. What's the deal? But they are agreeing to sell the property for the list price. And for those of you who have had listings and those who have not yet had listings but will, if you're going to do a price change, so a price drop or a price increase for some reason, whatever you're going to do, you have to have a copy of those in writing. For the purposes of this, an email is just fine. You don't need them to sign anything. But if you call your seller and you're like, hey, I think we should do a $10,000 price drop, and they're like, okay, great, do it, and you turn around and do it without getting anything in writing, there's always that potential they come back, especially if something goes sideways, and they go, well, wait a second, I didn't say, lower the price. That's not what I meant. What I meant was blah, 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 blah. So if you're gonna change the listing price after you've listed it, do it verbally, that's fine, but then send a follow-up email. Hey, Mr. Smith.
Muted. Unmuted.
Oh, somehow I muted myself. My bad. So if you're, so if Mr. Smith says, hey, go ahead and lower the price $10,000, you say great, and you're going to go ahead and turn around, send them an email that says, hey, Mr. Smith.
Muted. Unmuted.
Hey, William, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but you're going in and